Hello, everyone. Welcome back to End Times Ambience. If you want to skip this director's introduction, look at the first comment below and you'll see a comment there. Today's video focuses around a historical what-if scenario regarding the Cuban Missile Crisis. I've always been fascinated by alternate history, and a lot of that obsession began with Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcast, specifically his Blueprints for Armageddon series, where he talks about the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand and how taking the wrong turn down an unfamiliar street in Sarajevo changed the entire world. We like to think that history is shaped on these massive, slow-moving forces, but sometimes history just pauses at the right head of a pen. Sometimes the entire weight of the future rests on the shoulders of one ordinary guy in one impossible minute. So when I sat down to write this story about the Cuban Missile Crisis, the hardest part was just trying to find the exact moment for history to break. There were so many moments during the Cuban Missile Crisis where this would occur, and finding the right one was kind of difficult. But I finally decided to focus on the evening of October 27th, 1962. Picture this: you've got a submarine, Soviet submarine, submerged in the warm waters of the Caribbean. The temperatures inside the hull are 110 degrees. Carbon dioxide is building up, and they're actively being hammered by U.S. Navy depth charges. In this sub, they had no idea what was going on. They were too deep for radio traffic, so they thought that World War III had actually started. So down in this submarine, there sat a 15-kiloton nuclear torpedo. And to launch it, three specific men had to agree. The captain, who believed his country was already at war, wanted to fire. The political officer also agreed. But in reality, a 46-year-old commander named Arkhipov was the lone holdout. He said no. He talked the captain down, and the torpedo stayed in its tube. But this story asks the ultimate alternate history question: what if he had said yes? So grab your headphones, turn out the lights, and let's listen to one of the histories that might have been. Enjoy the show.
Good evening. I'm afraid tonight's little affair concerns a rather bleak November. A November that, as it happens, never occurred, though it might have quite easily. And that, I confess, is what makes the whole business so diverting. What follows draws upon the actual record of October 1962. Certain broadcasts, certain speeches, certain letters between anxious statesmen have been borrowed, rearranged, and put to rather grimmer purposes than their authors intended. One hopes the authors won't mind. A small formality before we proceed. The voices you're about to hear have been conjured by artificial intelligence. The story itself, I assure you, was directed by a human hand. A further clarification, while we're being tedious: the names and the voices are those of actual persons who lived through the week in question. The thoughts placed in their mouths, however, are altogether ours. You oughtn't take any of it as the genuine sentiment of the departed. They're entitled to their dignity, and we, one supposes, to our diversions. Enjoy the show.
Submitted for your consideration. A summer afternoon in the city of Sarajevo, June 28th, 1914. An archduke takes a wrong turn down an unfamiliar street. A young man with a pistol in his coat pocket happens to be standing on the corner. 2 shots are fired, and in the space between 2 heartbeats, an empire of 300 million souls begins its long march toward the grave. History, the historians like to tell us, is shaped by movements, by economic forces, by the slow tectonic grinding of nations and ideologies and the long, quiet workings of the centuries. But once in a great long while, history pauses on the head of a pin. Once in a great long while, the entire weight of what is to come comes to rest on the shoulders of one ordinary man, in one ordinary room, in one impossible minute. And whatever that man chooses to do in that minute, the rest of us are made to live with for the remainder of our days. Picture the following: a Soviet submarine, Foxtrot class, diesel electric, submerged in the warm green waters of the Caribbean Sea on the evening of October 27th, 1962. The temperature inside the pressure hull has climbed to 110 degrees Fahrenheit. The carbon dioxide is approaching the threshold of unconsciousness. For 4 days now, the boat has been hammered by the depth charges of the United States Navy, and in a steel compartment near the stern, there's a torpedo. The warhead of that torpedo carries the explosive power of 15 kilotons, the same yield, more or less, that erased the city of Hiroshima. In a single small compartment of that submarine, 3 men hold the keys to the launch. The captain, half mad with the heat and the fear and 4 days without sleep, wants to fire. The political officer, loyal to the captain and to the party that put him there, wants to fire. The third man is the flotilla deputy commander. His name is Vasily Arkhipov. He's 46 years old. He has a wife waiting for him in a small apartment in Moscow. He has a daughter, and in the next 60 seconds, he's going to make the most consequential decision any single human being has ever been called upon to make. In the world you and I happen to inhabit, Vasily Arkhipov said no. The torpedo stayed in its tube. The submarine surfaced into the moonlight, and the rest of us were given another evening, and another after that, for the better part of a century. But there's another world, a world a single syllable away from this one, a world in which the deputy commander on that submarine said yes, the hour is late, the signal is weak, submitted, for the record, as one of the histories that might have been.
Good evening. This is Walter Cronkite, and this is CBS News. The date is October 16th, 1962. The headlines this evening are largely unremarkable. Midterm elections dominate the front pages, with candidates from both parties trading accusations in the final weeks of the campaign. The Mercury space program continues apace, with NASA officials expressing confidence that American astronauts will walk on the lunar surface before the decade is out. In sports, the New York Yankees have taken the World Series from the San Francisco Giants 4-3, and in Hollywood, the new film Dr. No, featuring a British secret agent named James Bond, has opened to considerable interest. It is, in most respects, an ordinary autumn evening in America. Families are gathered around their television sets, children are completing their schoolwork, the nation is at peace. We turn now to our correspondent, Robert Pierpoint, who filed this report from Washington earlier this evening regarding developments in the intelligence community. Mr. Pierpoint.
This is Robert Pierpoint, CBS News, reporting from the White House. What we can confirm at this hour is that President Kennedy received an urgent briefing early this morning, summoned from his residence before 7 a.m. Eastern Time. The subject of that briefing, according to sources within the administration, was aerial reconnaissance photography taken over the western provinces of Cuba. The National Photographic Interpretation Center, working through the night, has apparently identified something in those photographs that required the president's immediate attention. White House press officials are declining to characterize the nature of the intelligence. They describe the president's schedule as proceeding normally. A previously scheduled meeting with West German Foreign Minister Gerhard Schroeder went forward this afternoon without apparent incident. What I can tell you, and this is not confirmed by official sources, is that senior members of the National Security Council have been seen entering the West Wing throughout the day. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, Secretary of State Dean Rusk, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, an unusual concentration of authority for what the White House describes as routine consultations. There is a term circulating among the press corps this evening, though no official will speak it on the record. That term is offensive weapons, the implication being that Soviet military assistance to the Castro government may have crossed a threshold that President Kennedy publicly warned against on September 4th. I must emphasize that we do not know what the U-2 reconnaissance aircraft photographed near San Cristobal. We do not know whether the president considers it a threat to American security. What we know is that something is happening behind closed doors at the White House, and that the men responsible for this nation's defense have been working through the night to understand it. This is Robert Pierpoint, CBS News, Washington.
Our correspondent, Robert Pierpoint, reporting from the White House. We will, of course, continue to monitor the situation in Washington and bring you further reports as information becomes available. It is worth noting, for context, that Soviet Premier Khrushchev has publicly assured the United States, as recently as last month, that all military equipment delivered to Cuba is purely defensive in nature. Surface-to-air missiles, patrol boats, the machinery of territorial protection, not aggression. Whether that assurance holds in light of today's intelligence briefings, we cannot say. The President has made no public statement. The State Department has issued no clarification And so the nation continues its ordinary evening, unaware that 90 miles off the coast of Florida, something may have changed. We now return you to your regularly scheduled programming. This has been CBS News. And that's the way it is. Wednesday, October 16th, 1962. I'm Walter Cronkite. Good night.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere. Upon receiving the first preliminary hard information of this nature, last Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., I directed that our surveillance be stepped up. And having now confirmed and completed our evaluation of the evidence and our decision on a course of action, this government feels obliged to report this new crisis to you in fullest detail. The characteristic of these new missile sites indicate two distinct types of installations. Several of them include medium-range ballistic missiles capable of carrying a nuclear warhead for a distance of more than 1,000 nautical miles. Each of these missiles, in short, is capable of striking Washington, D.C., the Panama Canal, Cape Canaveral, Mexico City, or any other city in the southeastern part of the United States, in Central America, or in the Caribbean area. Additional sites not yet completed appear to be designed for intermediate range ballistic missiles, capable of traveling more than twice as far, and thus capable of striking most of the major cities in the Western Hemisphere, ranging as far north as Hudson's Bay, Canada, and as far south as Lima, Peru. In addition, jet bombers capable of carrying nuclear weapons are now being uncrated and assembled in Cuba, while the necessary air bases are being prepared. This urgent transformation of Cuba into an important strategic base by the presence of these large, long-range, and clearly offensive weapons of sudden mass destruction constitutes an explicit threat to the peace and security of all the Americas, in flagrant and deliberate defiance of the Rio Pact of 1947, the traditions of this nation and hemisphere, the joint resolution of the 87th Congress, the Charter of the United Nations, and my own public warnings to the Soviets on September 4th and 13th. This action also contradicts the repeated assurances of Soviet spokesmen, both publicly and privately delivered, that the arms buildup in Cuba would retain its original defensive character, and that the Soviet Union had no need or desire to station strategic missiles on the territory of any other nation. The size of this undertaking makes clear that it has been planned for some months. Yet only last month, after I had made clear the distinction between any introduction of ground-to-ground missiles and the existence of defensive anti-aircraft missiles, The Soviet government publicly stated on September 11th that, and I quote, "The armaments and military equipment sent to Cuba are designed exclusively for defensive purposes," unquote. That there is, and I quote the Soviet government, "there is no need for the Soviet government to shift its weapons for a retaliatory blow to any other country, for instance, Cuba," unquote. And that, and I quote the government, "the Soviet Union has so powerful rockets to carry these nuclear warheads that there is no need to search for sites for them beyond the boundaries of the Soviet Union," unquote. That statement was false. Only last Thursday, as evidence of this rapid offensive buildup was already in my hand, Soviet Foreign Minister Gromyko told me in my office that he was instructed to make it clear once again, as he said his government had already done, that Soviet assistance to Cuba, and I quote, "pursued solely the purpose of contributing to the defense capabilities of Cuba," unquote. That, and I quote him, "training by Soviet specialists of Cuban nationals in handling defensive armaments was by no means offensive. And that if it were otherwise," Mr. Gromyko went on, "the Soviet government would never become involved in rendering such assistance," unquote. That statement also was false. Neither the United States of America nor the world community of nations can tolerate deliberate deception and offensive threats on the part of any nation, large or small. We no longer live in a world where only the actual firing of weapons represents a sufficient challenge to a nation's security to constitute maximum peril. Nuclear weapons are so destructive and ballistic missiles are so swift that any substantially increased possibility of their use or any sudden change in their deployment may well be regarded as a definite threat to peace. For many years, both the Soviet Union and the United States, recognizing this fact, have deployed strategic nuclear weapons with great care, never upsetting the precarious status quo, which ensured that these weapons would not be used in the absence of some vital challenge. Our own strategic missiles have never been transferred to the territory of any other nation under a cloak of secrecy and deception. And our history, unlike that of the Soviets since the end of World War II, demonstrates that we have no desire to dominate or conquer any other nation or impose our system upon its people. Nevertheless, American citizens have become adjusted to living daily on the bullseye of Soviet missiles located inside the USSR or in submarines. In that sense, missiles in Cuba add to an already clear and present danger. Although it should be noted, the nations of Latin America have never previously been subjected to a potential nuclear threat. But this secret, swift, extraordinary buildup of communist missiles in an area well known to have a special and historical relationship to the United States and the nations of the Western Hemisphere, in violation of Soviet assurances and in defiance of American and hemispheric policy, this sudden, clandestine decision to station strategic weapons for the first time outside of Soviet soil is a deliberately provocative and unjustified change in the status quo, which cannot be accepted by this country if our courage and our commitments are ever to be trusted again by either friend or foe. The 1930s taught us a clear lesson. Aggressive conduct, if allowed to go unchecked and unchallenged, ultimately leads to war. This nation is opposed to war. We are also true to our word. Our unswerving objective, therefore, must be to prevent the use of these missiles against this or any other country, and to secure their withdrawal or elimination from the Western Hemisphere. Our policy has been one of patience and restraint, as befits a peaceful and powerful nation which leads a worldwide alliance. We have been determined not to be diverted from our central concerns by mere irritants and fanatics. But now further action is required, and it is underway, and these actions may only be the beginning. We will not prematurely or unnecessarily risk the course of worldwide nuclear war, in which even the fruits of victory would be ashes in our mouth. But neither will we shrink from that risk at any time it must be faced. Acting, therefore, in the defense of our own security and of the entire Western Hemisphere, and under the authority entrusted to me by the Constitution, as endorsed by the resolution of the Congress, I have directed that the following initial steps be taken immediately. First, to halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, where they're found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back. This quarantine will be extended, if needed, to other types of cargo and carriers. We are not at this time, however, denying the necessities of life, as the Soviets attempted to do in their Berlin blockade of 1948. Second, I have directed the continued and increased close surveillance of Cuba and its military buildup. The foreign ministers of the OAS, in their communique of October 6, rejected secrecy on such matters in this hemisphere. Should these offensive military preparations continue, thus increasing the threat to the hemisphere, further action will be justified. I have directed the armed forces to prepare for any eventualities, and I trust that in the interest of both the Cuban people and the Soviet technicians at the sites, the hazards to all concerned of continuing this threat will be recognized. Third, it shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. Fourth, as a necessary military precaution, I have reinforced our base at Guantanamo, evacuated today the dependents of our personnel there, and ordered additional military units to be on a standby alert basis. Fifth, we are calling tonight for an immediate meeting of the Organization of Consultation under the Organization of American States to consider this threat to hemispheric security and to invoke Articles 6 and 8 of the Rio Treaty in support of all necessary action. The United Nations Charter allows for regional security arrangements, and the nations of this hemisphere decided long ago against the military presence of outside powers. Our other allies around the world have also been alerted. Sixth, under the Charter of the United Nations, we are asking tonight that an emergency meeting of the Security Council be convoked without delay to take action against this latest Soviet threat to world peace. Our resolution will call for the prompt dismantling and withdrawal of all offensive weapons in Cuba under the supervision of UN observers before the quarantine can be lifted. Seventh and finally, I call upon Chairman Khrushchev to halt and eliminate this clandestine, reckless, and provocative threat to world peace and to stable relations between our two nations. I call upon him further to abandon this course of world domination and to join in an historic effort to end the perilous arms race and to transform the history of man. He has an opportunity now to move the world back from the abyss of destruction by returning to his government's own words that it had no need to station missiles outside its own territory, and withdrawing these weapons from Cuba, by refraining from any action which will widen or deepen the present crisis, and then by participating in a search for peaceful and permanent solutions. This nation is prepared to present its case against the Soviet threat to peace and our own proposals for a peaceful world at any time and in any forum, in the OAS, in the United Nations, or in any other meeting that could be useful, without limiting our freedom of action. We have in the past made strenuous efforts to limit the spread of nuclear weapons. We have proposed the elimination of all arms and military bases in a fair and effective disarmament treaty. We are prepared to discuss new proposals for the removal of tensions on both sides, including the possibilities of a genuinely independent Cuba, free to determine its own destiny. We have no wish to war with the Soviet Union, for we are a peaceful people who desire to live in peace with all other peoples. But it is difficult to settle or even discuss these problems in an atmosphere of intimidation. That is why this latest Soviet threat, or any other threat, which is made either independently or in response to our actions this week, must and will be met with determination. Any hostile move anywhere in the world against the safety and freedom of peoples to whom we are committed, including in particular the brave people of West Berlin, will be met by whatever action is needed. Finally, I want to say a few words to the captive people of Cuba, to whom this speech is being directly carried by special radio facilities. I speak to you as a friend, as one who knows of your deep attachment to your fatherland, as one who shares your aspirations for liberty and justice for all. And I have watched, and the American people have watched, with deep sorrow, how your nationalist revolution was betrayed and how your fatherland fell under foreign domination. Now your leaders are no longer Cuban leaders, inspired by Cuban ideals. They are puppets and agents of an international conspiracy which has turned Cuba against your friends and neighbors in the Americas and turned it into the first Latin American country to become a target for nuclear war, the first Latin American country to have these weapons on its soil. These new weapons are not in your interest. They contribute nothing to your peace and well-being. They can only undermine it. But this country has no wish to cause you to suffer or to impose any system upon you. We know that your lives and land are being used as pawns by those who deny your freedom. Many times in the past, the Cuban people have risen to throw out tyrants who destroyed their liberty. And I have no doubt that most Cubans today look forward to the time when they will be truly free, free from foreign domination, free to choose their own leaders, free to select their own system, free to own their own land, free to speak and write and worship without fear or degradation. And then shall Cuba be welcomed back to the society of free nations and to the associations of this hemisphere. My fellow citizens, let no one doubt that this is a difficult and dangerous effort on which we have set out. No one can foresee precisely what course it will take, or what costs or casualties will be incurred. Many months of sacrifice and self-discipline lie ahead, months in which both our patience and our will be tested, months in which many threats and denunciations will keep us aware of our dangers. But the greatest danger of all would be to do nothing. The path we have chosen for the present is full of hazards, as all paths are. But it is the one most consistent with our character and courage as a nation and our commitments around the world. The cost of freedom is always high, but Americans have always paid it. And one path we shall never choose, and that is the path of surrender or submission. Our goal is not the victory of might, but the vindication of right. Not peace at the expense of freedom, but both peace and freedom here in this hemisphere, and we hope around the world. God willing, that goal will be achieved. Thank you, and good night.
Good evening. This is CBS News, and I'm Walter Cronkite. We interrupt our regularly scheduled programming to bring you this bulletin. The date is October 22nd, 1962. The time is approximately 8:45 this evening, Eastern Standard Time. Within the past hour, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy addressed the nation from the Oval Office, delivering what must be characterized as the gravest presidential address since the Second World War. The President has confirmed what our correspondents have reported in fragments over the past 6 days. The Soviet Union has placed nuclear missiles on the island of Cuba, medium-range ballistic missiles, capable of striking the major cities of the American Southeast, the Gulf Coast, and as far north as Washington, D.C. In response to this discovery, President Kennedy has announced the immediate implementation of what he termed a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba. The United States Navy will intercept any vessel carrying weapons or military supplies and turn it back. This quarantine takes effect at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. The President was explicit in his warning to the Soviet leadership. I will read the relevant passage directly. Quote, "It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union." End quote. We go now to our United Nations correspondent, Richard Hotelet, who has been monitoring the reaction at the Security Council. Mr. Hotelet.
This is Richard Hotelet, CBS News, reporting from the United Nations building in New York. The atmosphere here can only be described as extraordinary. Diplomats are moving through the corridors with a visible urgency I have not observed in my years covering this institution. The United States delegation, led by Ambassador Adlai Stevenson, has formally requested an emergency session of the Security Council. That request has been granted. Soviet Ambassador Valerian Zorin, who currently holds the rotating presidency of the Council, will preside over the session. The irony of that arrangement is not lost on observers here. The Soviet delegation issued a brief statement within the past 30 minutes denouncing the American quarantine as, quote, "an act of piracy and aggression against a sovereign nation," end quote. They have characterized the naval blockade as a violation of international law and have demanded its immediate withdrawal. It is worth noting that President Kennedy deliberately chose the word quarantine rather than blockade for this operation. Under international maritime law, a blockade constitutes an act of war. A quarantine, particularly one authorized by the Organization of American States, may occupy a different legal position. Whether the Soviets will recognize that distinction remains to be seen. I have spoken with representatives of several neutral nations this evening, including India, Sweden, and the United Arab Republic. The sentiment among them is one of profound alarm. One ambassador, who requested that I not identify him by nation, described the situation as the closest the world has come to general war since 1945. This is Richard Hotelet, CBS News, the United Nations.
Our correspondent, Richard Hotelet, reporting from the United Nations. We have received additional confirmation from the Department of Defense regarding military preparations now underway. The Associated Press is reporting that all American military forces have been elevated to Defense Condition 3, the highest state of peacetime readiness. Strategic Air Command bombers have been dispersed to secondary airfields. The Atlantic Fleet is steaming toward Cuba. A quarantine line has been established 500 miles from the Cuban coast with orders to intercept any vessel carrying offensive military cargo. The Pentagon has confirmed that the aircraft carrier USS Essex is leading an anti-submarine hunter-killer group toward the Caribbean. Additional units include the heavy cruisers Newport News and Canberra. This represents the largest naval deployment since the Korean War. Soviet merchant ships are at this hour proceeding toward Cuba. Intelligence estimates suggest that approximately 25 cargo vessels are currently at sea, some carrying unknown military equipment. Whether those ships will challenge the American quarantine line, we cannot say. What we can say is that the next 48 hours may determine whether this confrontation remains diplomatic or becomes something else entirely. Citizens in cities across America are tonight stocking emergency supplies. Civil defense shelters are being reopened and inspected. School districts in Florida and Georgia are preparing contingency plans. The American public, which went to bed 6 days ago in a nation at peace, awakens tomorrow to a world in which nuclear war is no longer an abstraction. We will continue to bring you reports throughout the evening as events warrant. This has been a special bulletin from CBS News. I'm Walter Cronkite. Good night. Good evening. This is CBS News. I'm Walter Cronkite. The date is October 25th, 1962. The quarantine of Cuba is now entering its third day. We begin tonight with extraordinary developments at the United Nations, where the United States and the Soviet Union engaged in what can only be described as a direct confrontation on the floor of the Security Council. Ambassador Adlai Stevenson, representing the United States, challenged Soviet Ambassador Valerian Zorin to confirm or deny the presence of offensive missiles in Cuba. Ambassador Zorin declined to respond directly. What followed was perhaps the most dramatic exchange in the history of that institution. I will read Ambassador Stevenson's reply to Zorin's evasion. Quote, "I am prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over," end quote. We're going to play you some footage from this exchange now.
Mr. Zorin, gentlemen, I want to say to you, Mr. Zorin, that I don't have your talent for obfuscation, for distortion, for confusing language, and for double talk. And I must confess to you that I'm glad I don't. But if I understood what you said that my position had changed, that today I was defensive, because we didn't have the evidence to prove our assertions that your government had installed long-range missiles in Cuba. Well, let me say something to you, Mr. Ambassador. We do have the evidence. We have it, and it's clear and incontrovertible. And let me say something else. Those weapons must be taken out of Cuba. And next, let me say to you that if I understood you with a trespass on credulity that excels your best, you said that our position had changed since I spoke here the other day because of the pressures of world opinion and the majority of the United Nations. Well, let me say to you, sir, you are wrong again. We have had no pressure from anyone whatsoever. We came in here today to indicate our willingness to discuss Mr. Outhant's proposals. And that is the only change that has taken place. But let me also say to you, sir, that there has been a change. You, the Soviet Union, has sent these weapons to Cuba. You, the Soviet Union, has upset the balance of power in the world. You, the Soviet Union, has created this new danger, not the United States. And you asked with a fine show of indignation why the President didn't tell Mr. Gromyko on last Thursday about our evidence, at the very time that Mr. Gromyko was blandly denying to the President that that the USSR was placing such weapons on sites in the New World. Well, I'll tell you why. Because we were assembling the evidence, and perhaps it would be instructive to the world to see how a Soviet official, how far he would go in perfidy. Perhaps we wanted to know if this country faced another example of nuclear deceit, like that one a year ago, when in stealth the Soviet Union broke the nuclear test moratorium. And while we're asking questions, let me ask you why your government, your foreign minister, deliberately, cynically deceived us about the nuclear buildup in Cuba. And finally, the other day, Mr. Zorin, I remind you that you didn't deny the existence of these weapons. Instead, we heard that they had suddenly become defensive weapons. But today, again, if I heard you correctly, you now say they don't exist, or that we haven't proved they exist, with another fine flood of rhetorical scorn. All right, sir. Let me ask you one simple question. Do you, Ambassador Zorin, deny that the USSR has placed and is placing medium and intermediate range missiles and sites in Cuba? Yes or no? Don't wait for the translation, yes or no?
I should like to say
Продолжайте вашу речь, господин Стивенсон. В свое время вы получите ответ.
Mr. Stevenson, would you continue your statement, please? You will receive the answer in the due course. Do not worry.
I'm prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over, if that's your decision. And I'm also prepared to present the evidence in this room.
Ambassador Stevenson then presented before the Security Council and the world the enlarged aerial reconnaissance photographs taken by American U-2 aircraft over Cuba. The photographs clearly displayed missile launch sites under construction, canvas-covered missiles on transport vehicles, and the distinctive six-pointed pattern of Soviet SA-2 anti-aircraft batteries. The Soviet delegation has issued no formal response to the photographs. Ambassador Zorin characterized them as, quote, fabrications typical of American intelligence services, end quote. He did not elaborate. For analysis on these developments, we turn now to our commentator, Eric Severeid. Mr. Severeid.
Good evening. What we witnessed today at the United Nations was, in a sense, the moment when the world finally saw the evidence that President Kennedy has been acting upon for the past 9 days. The photographs leave little room for interpretation. Those are Soviet missiles, those are Soviet launchers, and they are 90 miles from Florida. Ambassador Zorin's refusal to engage with the evidence is itself revealing. The Soviets have two options at this stage. They can deny the photographs outright, which becomes increasingly untenable as the evidence mounts, or they can acknowledge the missiles and attempt to justify their presence as a defensive measure against American aggression. Neither position is comfortable. What is more interesting to me, and perhaps more hopeful, is what the Soviets are not doing. They're not escalating. The ships that were approaching the quarantine line have slowed. Some have stopped entirely. The tanker Bucharest was permitted to pass this morning after inspection confirmed it carried only petroleum. Another vessel, the Volgolese, has altered course and appears to be returning to port. Secretary of State Rusk reportedly remarked to colleagues this morning, and I quote loosely from second-hand sources, that the Soviets blinked. Whether that assessment is premature remains to be seen. But there is a window here, a narrow space for negotiation that did not exist 48 hours ago. Rumors persist in diplomatic circles of a possible trade. The United States has Jupiter missiles stationed in Turkey, positioned there to provide a deterrent against Soviet aggression toward NATO allies. Those missiles are, in a sense, the mirror image of what the Soviets have placed in Cuba. Both represent a strategic escalation. Both place nuclear weapons within striking distance of the other superpower's heartland. I must emphasize that no official has confirmed any discussion of such a trade. The State Department has declined to comment. But the logic of the situation suggests that some form of reciprocal arrangement may ultimately be necessary to resolve this crisis without bloodshed. The question is whether such an arrangement can be reached before the situation deteriorates further.
Our commentator, Eric Severeid. We have also received word this evening that United Nations Secretary General U Thant has personally appealed to both President Kennedy and Premier Khrushchev to halt the escalation. Secretary General U Thant has proposed a temporary suspension of the quarantine, combined with a moratorium on further Soviet weapons shipments, to allow time for negotiation. The White House has not formally responded to Secretary General Uthant's proposal. Sources within the administration describe the president as, quote, considering all options, end quote. The Kremlin, for its part, has described the proposal as, quote, constructive, end quote, without committing to specific terms. On the home front, civil defense drills continue across the southeastern United States. Schools in Miami and Atlanta have distributed identification tags to students. Grocery stores report shortages of canned goods, batteries, and bottled water. The nation waits. What we can say with confidence tonight is that the immediate threat of naval confrontation has receded, at least temporarily. Soviet ships have not tested the quarantine line. American destroyers have not been forced to fire warning shots. There is, for the first time since this crisis began, a slender thread of hope that it may end without war. Whether that thread will hold, we cannot know. The missiles in Cuba remain operational, the construction continues, and time, as the President has made clear, is not on our side. We will continue to bring you reports as this situation develops. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. And that's the way it is, Thursday, October 25th, 1962. Good night.
Good evening. This broadcast is reaching you on a frequency they would prefer you never found. My name is William Cooper, and if you've tuned this signal in tonight, then you're one of the few Americans who still remembers how to listen. Tonight I'm going to tell you what's actually happening down in the Caribbean. Not what Mr. Cronkite told you at 6:30. Not what your president told you from the Oval Office. The truth. And the truth is going to be a great deal harder than the lie. So put down the newspaper. Sit closer to the set and listen carefully. Here's the story they've sold you. Soviet missiles in Cuba. A grave and unforeseen threat to the Republic. President Kennedy standing tall against communist aggression. The Atlantic Fleet steaming south toward a confrontation that could end the world by Tuesday. You're supposed to be afraid. You're supposed to gather your family around the radio set and pray for the president. You're supposed to dig out the basement, lay in the canned goods, and trust that the men in Washington are protecting you. That's the whole script. Now here's what they aren't telling you. This crisis didn't catch our intelligence services by surprise. Naval intelligence has been tracking those Soviet freighters since they cleared the Baltic in July. Every cargo manifest, every port of call. Our reconnaissance pilots have been photographing those construction sites in San Cristobal for weeks. The Pentagon has known about the missile components since the end of August, maybe earlier than that. And they did nothing. They watched. They waited. Now you ask yourself why a government that knows would choose to do nothing. Because this isn't a fight between two nations. This is theater. Cuba is the stage. Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Khrushchev are the leading men. But the script was written somewhere else, by people whose names you'll never hear on the evening news. President Eisenhower warned us. January 17th, 1961. His farewell address from the Oval Office. He told the American people, in plain language, to beware the unwarranted influence of the military-industrial complex. 8 years inside that machine, and on his way out the door he tried to warn us. How many of your neighbors do you suppose were listening? And it isn't just the generals. The men who really pull the strings sit in boardrooms in New York and London and Zurich. International bankers, the same families that financed both sides of the last 2 world wars. The Council on Foreign Relations, which has quietly placed its members in every administration since Roosevelt sat in that chair. They don't care about communism. They don't care about capitalism. Those are just the colors on the uniforms. What they care about is consolidation. One government, one currency, one frightened population willing to surrender its liberties at the sound of a siren. Look at how quickly the apparatus moved into place. Civil defense drills in every major city by Wednesday. Identification tags on the school children. Emergency powers already drafted and waiting on the president's desk. The National Guard mobilized in 6 states before the speech even aired. Now that isn't a response to a Soviet threat. That's a rehearsal. They're measuring how quickly the population obeys, how easily we hand over our freedoms when a man on the radio tells us we're in danger. And the answer, friends, is going to be very easily indeed. Think about it. Kennedy and Khrushchev are supposedly enemies. But isn't it interesting that both of them keep finding ways to step back from the brink? Isn't it interesting that every time the situation looks like it might spin out of control, suddenly there's a diplomatic off-ramp? The Soviet ships slow down. The quarantine line moves. Back-channel negotiations. It's a dance. And they've choreographed every step. The missiles in Cuba are real. I'm not saying they're not, but they're not there to threaten us. They're there to justify what's coming next. Emergency legislation, expanded executive powers, the permanent militarization of American society. They need a crisis big enough to transform the country, and they're building one right in front of our eyes. Now here's what I need you to do. Stock up on supplies, not because the Soviets are going to bomb us, but because the chaos they're engineering could disrupt everything. Food distribution, fuel supplies, communications. They want you dependent on them. Don't be. Tell your neighbors. Tell your family. Make copies of this broadcast if you can. The truth is the only weapon we have, and they are terrified of it. If enough people wake up, if enough people refuse to be afraid, their whole plan falls apart. This has been the hour of the time. My name is William Cooper. They can silence this broadcast. They can come for me, but they cannot stop the truth. God bless you all, and God bless the Republic. Behold, a pale horse.
Good evening. This is CBS News. I'm Walter Cronkite. The date is Friday, October 26th, 1962. 11 days now since the president first received word of Soviet missiles in Cuba. 5 days since he addressed the nation. 4 days since the naval quarantine took effect. And tonight, For the first time in this crisis, we're able to report developments that suggest a path away from open war. At the United Nations this morning, Secretary General U Thant received a formal reply from Premier Khrushchev to the proposal he advanced earlier this week. The Soviet leader has accepted, in principle, a temporary suspension of further weapons shipments to Cuba. The White House has responded with what officials describe as cautious interest. President Kennedy hasn't committed to a corresponding suspension of the quarantine, but neither has he ruled it out. Ambassador Stevenson continues to press the American case before the Security Council. The reconnaissance photographs that he displayed yesterday remain on view in the chamber. Soviet Ambassador Zorin, for his part, hasn't offered further public comment since the exchange that has already become famous in the diplomatic world. At sea, the quarantine line continues to hold without bloodshed. Yesterday morning, the Soviet tanker Bucharest, approaching Cuba with a cargo American officials concluded was petroleum, was permitted to pass after visual inspection. The captain made no attempt to evade the boarding party. The ship continued on its course. No shots were fired. This morning, at approximately 7:30 Eastern Time, the destroyer USS Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. intercepted a Lebanese flag freighter named the Marukla. The destroyer carries the name of the president's elder brother, who fell in the last war. A boarding party was put across in the open ocean. The Marukla submitted to inspection without incident. Her cargo was determined to consist of paper goods, sulfur, and truck parts. She was permitted to continue to Havana. Pentagon officials described the inspection as having proceeded, quote, in textbook fashion, end quote. In southern Florida, the situation continues to develop along its own course. Cuban refugees who fled the island in the days following the president's address have continued to arrive at the port of Miami. Tent cities have been erected at Tropical Park to receive them. The International Rescue Committee reports that more than 1,400 Cubans have come ashore in the past week, bringing little with them but the clothes they were wearing. Across the nation, civil defense preparations have escalated. In New York City, more than 400 designated fallout shelters opened their doors today for inspection by the public. School children in the city's elementary schools conducted duck and cover drills throughout the morning. In Atlanta and Miami, identification dog tags are being distributed to children. Each tag bears the child's name, blood type, and home address. Hospital authorities throughout the state of Florida have been instructed to maintain emergency wards on continuous standby. For more on the situation here in Washington, we go now to our White House correspondent, Robert Pierpoint. Mr. Pierpoint.
This is Robert Pierpoint, CBS News, reporting from the White House. The Executive Committee of the National Security Council, the body the President has convened to manage this crisis, has been in continuous session throughout the day. Members have come and gone in shifts. Sandwiches and coffee have been brought up from the White House kitchen. The lights in the cabinet room haven't gone out since shortly after sunrise. The President himself broke from these consultations briefly this morning to attend Mass at St. Stephen Martyr Catholic Church on Pennsylvania Avenue. He was accompanied by Mrs. Kennedy. Aides described the President as visibly tired but composed. Reporters present at the church noted that the President remained in the pews for several minutes after the service had concluded. He spoke briefly with the priest. He prayed alone. Earlier this afternoon, Attorney General Robert Kennedy was observed entering the Soviet embassy on 16th Street Northwest. The State Department has declined to characterize the nature of the visit. Sources within the diplomatic community indicate that the Attorney General has been conducting back-channel discussions with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin throughout the week. The substance of those discussions hasn't been disclosed. At approximately 9 o'clock this evening, the State Department received a long communication from Premier Khrushchev, transmitted through diplomatic channels. Officials who read the message describe it as personal in tone, less the language of a state document, more the language of a man speaking directly to another man. The Premier reportedly expresses a desire, and I'm quoting loosely from a senior official's characterization, to find a way back from the precipice. The President has been studying the letter for the past several hours. This network has separately learned of an unusual encounter that took place yesterday at the Occidental Restaurant on Pennsylvania Avenue. ABC News correspondent John Scaly was approached for lunch by Alexandra Famine, officially a counselor at the Soviet embassy, but believed by American intelligence to hold senior responsibilities in his nation's foreign service. Mr. Famine proposed a basis for resolution, the withdrawal of the missiles from Cuba in exchange for an American pledge not to invade the island. CBS News can't confirm whether this overture has been formally adopted by either government. but the resemblance to the Premier's evening letter is, at minimum, suggestive. I would be derelict, however, not to report what is taking place at the same hour the diplomats are searching for an exit. The American military is preparing for the alternative. The Pentagon hasn't commented officially on the scale of the assembly underway in Florida, but officers speaking on background indicate that the concentration of ground forces now staging in the southern peninsula has reached approximately 140,000 men. The figure is believed to represent the largest assembly of American ground forces since the closing months of the war in the Pacific. The Tactical Air Command has prepared strike packages of up to 1,200 sorties against targets on the Cuban islands. The Marine Amphibious Force is at sea. American allies have moved to corresponding states of readiness. Britain's Royal Air Force Bomber Command, which maintains that nation's airborne nuclear deterrent, has held its V-bomber force at heightened alert since the President's address on the 22nd. The West German Bundeswehr has been mobilized to defensive positions along the inter-German frontier. French forces in West Berlin have been reinforced. Whatever happens in the Caribbean, the consequences will be felt very quickly in Europe. From Havana itself, the picture grows more difficult to read. Premier Castro hasn't appeared publicly since Wednesday. Diplomatic sources report increasingly strident communications from the Cuban government to its Soviet patrons. Cuban militia units have been mobilized to defensive positions along the southern coast. Anti-aircraft batteries around the missile sites at San Cristobal and Sagua La Grande have been observed by reconnaissance flights tracking the incoming aircraft. The President is expected to remain at the White House through the night. The Executive Committee will reconvene at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. This is Robert Pierpoint, CBS News, the White House.
Our correspondent Robert Pierpoint reporting from the White House. Ladies and gentlemen, the 11 days through which we've lived since the President first learned of the missiles in Cuba have been the most difficult days many of us can remember. There's, tonight, a slender thread of negotiation between Washington and Moscow. It's the first such thread we've seen since this crisis began. Whether the thread holds may be known to us by tomorrow morning. Whether the thread holds may prove to be the question on which a great deal more than diplomatic prestige depends. For tonight, we offer it to you as a reason for hope, measured, incomplete, but real. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. And that's the way it is, Friday, October 26th, 1962. Good night. Good afternoon. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News, New York. We're interrupting our scheduled afternoon programming. Within the past hour, wire services in New York and Washington have begun carrying fragmented reports of military activity in and around the Cuban quarantine zone. The information at this hour is incomplete. What we know is this: an Air Force reconnaissance aircraft flying a routine high-altitude mission over Cuban airspace under standing orders from Strategic Air Command, has failed to return to its base in Florida on schedule. The pilot, a major in the United States Air Force, whose name has not been released by the Pentagon, is overdue and has not been heard from. For listeners just joining us, the United States Navy has, since Wednesday morning, been enforcing a quarantine of the Cuban coast under the President's proclamation of October 23rd. Vessels carrying offensive weaponry to Cuba have been ordered to turn back. Soviet ships en route to the island have, in most cases, altered course. Several remain at sea. Within the past 45 minutes, wire services have separately begun carrying reports of a maritime incident east of the quarantine line. For the view from the White House this afternoon, we go now to our correspondent Charles Collingwood.
Walter, thank you. The mood inside the West Wing this afternoon is harder to read than I'd like to admit. Since around 12:30, senior staff have, by my count, been moving between the Cabinet Room and the Oval Office at a clip well past the usual day's traffic. No one is stopping to talk. I can tell you the President has been in continuous session with his closest advisors. Beyond that, at this hour, I have very little I can confirm. A wire report has been circulating over the past several minutes regarding a Major Rudolph Anderson, Jr., United States Air Force, attached to the reconnaissance group flying over Cuban airspace. Bear with me. The press office referred us to the Pentagon. The Pentagon, so far, has not returned the call. Make of that what you will. On the maritime incident your wire is carrying, Walter, I have, frankly, less than I'd like to admit. What I can tell you is that the President has not yet addressed the nation. To our knowledge, he has not called the National Security Council into formal session this afternoon. That is unusual for a day like this. The building is quieter than it should be on a Saturday at this hour. Walter, back to you.
Charles Collingwood at the White House. As Charles was speaking, we received a flash bulletin from United Press International. The USS Randolph, flagship of an anti-submarine task force operating east of the quarantine line, has observed a brilliant flash on the southern horizon at 1:45 Eastern Time. That is the entirety of the bulletin as we have it. The wire offers nothing more. The Navy, when contacted at Norfolk, referred all questions to the Pentagon. The Pentagon has not yet returned our call. The White House, as Charles indicated, has not scheduled a briefing this afternoon. We'll continue to monitor developments as the afternoon progresses. CBS News will return to the air the moment we have additional confirmed information. For now, back to local. Good evening. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News, New York. We come to you again from our New York studios. Since our last report at 1:30 this afternoon, the situation in the Caribbean and in Washington has continued to develop. The information being released to us now is significantly graver than what we had 3 hours ago. At 3:40 this afternoon, the Department of Defense issued a statement. Major Anderson is dead. His aircraft, on its high-altitude reconnaissance run, was struck by a Soviet surface-to-air missile over Cuban airspace at 10:22 Eastern Time this morning, making him the first American combat casualty of this crisis. Separately, we are now able to expand on the bulletin we first carried at 1:30 this afternoon. The USS Randolph and several escort vessels operating east of the quarantine line reported a brilliant flash on the southern horizon at approximately 1:45 Eastern Time. Pentagon officials, speaking on background, have indicated the flash signature is consistent with a tactical nuclear detonation in the 15 to 20 kiloton range. The source has not been formally identified. The Navy is, at this hour, attempting to locate at least one destroyer that has gone silent following the event. For the view inside the West Wing this hour, we go again to Charles Collingwood. Charles?
Walter, the Joint Chiefs of Staff have been in continuous session with the President since shortly after 2 o'clock. Senior White House staff have not left the West Wing. The Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, and the Director of Central Intelligence are all present. The mood, and I'm choosing my words with care here, is closer to wartime than the usual press traffic in this building. From sources close to the meeting, the Joint Chiefs, by all reports, have urged the President to strike the missile sites and launch the invasion plan that has been ready since spring. It is unanimous. The President is reported to be resisting their recommendation. One source in the Cabinet room, speaking off the record, has quoted General LeMay, calling further delay criminal negligence in the defense of the United States. As to the maritime incident, the Pentagon has scheduled a press briefing for 5 o'clock Eastern Time, half an hour out. Officials here have indicated that a statement will be released ahead of the briefing. The contents of that statement, at this hour, are not known to us. That is the situation as we have it from inside the West Wing this hour. Walter, back to you.
Charles Collingwood at the White House. The Department of Defense has, within the past several minutes, released the prepared statement Charles referenced. I'll read it as it was handed to me. The United States Armed Forces have sustained losses as a result of hostile action by Soviet military personnel operating in the Caribbean region. The President has been briefed and is consulting with the Joint Chiefs of Staff regarding the appropriate response. At 3:30 this afternoon, Strategic Air Command and all other unified commands of the United States Armed Forces were elevated to Defense Condition 2. That is rare. The condition represents the highest state of military readiness short of active war. The Office of Civil Defense, within the past hour, has issued a precautionary alert to coastal counties from Maine to the Florida Keys, advising residents to review evacuation routes and fallout shelter locations. What we are reporting to you this hour is incomplete. The Pentagon's 5 o'clock briefing has been delayed. We are told the President is preparing to address the nation. Stand by.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. I come before you tonight from the White House, and I won't waste your time with reassurance, nor with the language of ordinary hours. The hour isn't ordinary. The events of these past days have brought our republic to the gravest moment in its history, and to the gravest moment, I believe, in the long history of the human family. I owe you the truth tonight, the truth of where we stand, and the truth of what now must follow. In the early hours of this day, Soviet forces stationed on the island of Cuba launched weapons of nuclear yield against American naval and military units in the waters of the Caribbean Sea. American sailors and American Marines have given their lives in the service of this republic. 5 days ago, I stood in this very room and made a pledge to the American people. I told you then that any nuclear strike from Cuba would be regarded as an act of the Soviet Union itself, requiring a full response. That pledge, I'm now bound by every duty of this office to keep. In the days behind us, we've pursued every honorable avenue of peace. Our negotiators have worked through every channel the United Nations could provide. I've exchanged direct correspondence with Chairman Khrushchev, man to man, president to premier. Each of us, I believe, wished sincerely to find a way back from this precipice. Tonight, that effort has failed, not because either of our nations desired this ending, but because the machinery of war, once set in motion, doesn't always heed the men who set it in motion. Within the hour, I've authorized the armed forces of the United States to undertake the measures necessary for the defense of our people and our territory, and to honor the solemn obligations we hold to our allies in Europe and across the world. I won't describe those measures here. The men and women in uniform who must carry them out have already begun. I've prayed that no president of these United States would ever be called upon to give the orders I've given tonight. I prayed that this cup might pass from us. It hasn't. To the American people, I say this. We've endured the darkness before. The men of the Continental Army endured it at Valley Forge. The men of the Union endured it at Gettysburg. Our fathers endured it on the beaches of Normandy and in the snows of Bastogne. Tonight, the burden falls upon you. Be not afraid. Trust in your neighbors. Trust in your God. Trust in the republic that has stood through every trial these many years. When this address concludes, the Office of Civil Defense will sound the attack warning. You'll hear that signal on this station and on every station that remains on the air tonight. Listen carefully to the instructions you receive. Move at once with your families to the fallout shelters designated in your community. Take only what you need. Help your neighbors as you go, and in the difficult hours ahead, be guided by the preparations we've practiced together these many years. My fellow citizens, I don't know what tomorrow will bring. No president who has stood in this office before me has known. But I know this: the American Republic wasn't given to us by accident, nor by the providence of any easy hour. It was bought with the courage of generations who came before us, and it's been our solemn duty in every age to preserve it. Tonight, that duty falls to every one of you. May God have mercy on those who must answer for this hour. May God protect those who must endure it. And may God bless the United States of America. Thank you, and good night.
This is an official civil defense emergency alert from the Office of Civil Defense, Department of Defense, United States of America. This is not a test. This is not a drill. This is an actual emergency. The attack warning has been sounded for the continental United States. All citizens are directed to take immediate protective action. This advisory applies to all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and all United States territories. Citizens in designated primary target areas are directed to proceed immediately to the nearest marked fallout shelter. Primary target areas include Washington, District of Columbia, New York, New York, Boston, Massachusetts, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Chicago, Illinois, Detroit, Michigan, Los Angeles, California, San Francisco, California, Seattle, Washington, all military installations and adjacent communities. Citizens not in designated primary target areas are directed to shelter in place. Move to the lowest level of the structure. Move to interior rooms away from windows and exterior walls. If a basement is available, proceed to the basement immediately. Do not look toward the horizon. Do not look toward any bright flash or fireball. Exposure to initial radiation and thermal effects can cause permanent blindness and severe burns. Shield the eyes. Shield exposed skin. Remain in a prone position on the floor, away from windows. Do not attempt to leave the shelter area for any reason. Do not open exterior doors or windows. Do not use telephone lines except in cases of immediate medical emergency. All telephone circuits are reserved for official communications. Citizens are directed to tune their AM radio receivers to the Connell rad frequencies, 640 on the dial or 1240 on the dial. These are the only authorized frequencies for official civil defense information. Do not rely on unofficial sources of information. Official updates will be provided at regular intervals or when conditions change. If outside when the attack warning sounds, seek the nearest substantial structure immediately. Do not attempt to return home if home is not nearby. Do not attempt to retrieve family members from distant locations. Any substantial building is preferable to open exposure. Following the initial event, citizens must remain in shelter for a minimum of 48 hours. Do not exit the shelter until the all clear is sounded by civil defense authorities. Radioactive fallout poses a persistent hazard. Premature departure from shelter significantly increases exposure risk. Repeat, the attack warning has been sounded for the continental United States. All citizens are directed to take immediate protective action. Proceed to the nearest fallout shelter or shelter in place on the lowest level of the structure. Do not look toward any bright flash. Remain in shelter until the all clear is sounded. Tune to Connell rad frequencies, 640 or 1240 on the AM dial for further instructions. This has been an official civil defense emergency alert from the Office of Civil Defense, Department of Defense. This message will repeat.
Good evening. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News, New York. For those of you joining us at the regular evening news hour, I'll review what we have learned this afternoon. The events of the past several hours have, since the loss of Major Anderson at 10:22 this morning, moved well beyond the framework of the crisis we have been covering since Tuesday. I'll read these as they came to us. Major Anderson is dead. His U-2 reconnaissance aircraft, flying a high-altitude mission over Cuban airspace, was destroyed by a Soviet surface-to-air missile at 10:22 this morning. He is the first American combat casualty of this crisis. At 1:45 this afternoon, we now know a Soviet submarine of the Foxtrot class, submerged east of the quarantine line, deployed a 15-kiloton nuclear torpedo against United States naval forces. The submarine has been identified by naval intelligence as the boat designated B-59. She fired. The destroyer USS Beale, part of the anti-submarine task force in pursuit of the vessel, has been lost with all hands. 2 additional escort vessels have reported severe damage and casualties. For the latest from the White House this evening, we go again to Charles Collingwood.
Walter, thank you. At 2:15 this afternoon, the President signed the executive order authorizing Operations Plan 316, the contingency invasion plan for the island of Cuba. The Joint Chiefs received the authorization within minutes. The first elements of the 82nd Airborne Division began boarding transport aircraft at Pope Air Force Base shortly after 3 o'clock. Marine amphibious forces of Joint Exercise Fibroglex 62 received their movement orders at the same hour. Their objective was the beach approach near Mariel Bay, west of Havana. Walter, what we have just learned is that the operation began ahead of the planned schedule. Paratroopers were dropped beginning at 3:45 this afternoon into the area east of Havana. Marine landing craft began their approach to the beaches near Mariel shortly thereafter. The president signed off on the acceleration. The Soviet response was, in the words of one Pentagon official, instantaneous. Tactical nuclear weapons in the 2 to 4 kiloton range struck both the airborne drop zone and the marine landing site at Mariel Bay at 4:12 this afternoon. Casualties are catastrophic. Walter, back to you.
Charles Collingwood at the White House. Within the past several minutes, Strategic Air Command and all subordinate commands of the armed forces have been elevated to Defense Condition 1, highest possible. Our forces are now ordered to engage the enemy. Strategic bomber and missile assets are at full launch posture. The Office of Civil Defense has, within the past hour, issued a national attack warning. Citizens are being directed to move to designated fallout shelter locations immediately. This is not a drill. I am being handed something. Bear with me. The wire I've just been handed is from Reuters, dated 4:20 this afternoon. I'll read it as it was given to me. The Soviet ambassador to the United Nations had, within the past several minutes, informed Secretary General Uthant that the Soviet Union considers itself in a state of war with the United States. That dispatch was received by the State Department 4 minutes ago. We are at war. CBS News will remain on the air as long as we are able. For now, please follow the instructions of your local civil defense authorities. Move to your designated shelter. God help us all. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News, New York.
This is Eric Silveride, CBS News in New York. The hour is approaching 11 o'clock Eastern Time on the night of Saturday, October 27th. You've heard, within the past several hours, the reports from the Caribbean. You've heard the President of the United States speak from the Oval Office. CBS News this evening attempted to reach by long-distance telephone a number of Americans who have given thought across the years to what we're witnessing tonight. One of those calls was answered. We're going now to Princeton, New Jersey. Dr. Robert Oppenheimer is on the line from his office at the Institute for Advanced Study. The connection is poor. We ask your patience. Dr. Oppenheimer, can you hear me?
Mr. Severade, yes, I can hear you. The line is, as you say, very poor.
Doctor, I'll be brief. The night is long for all of us. You, of all people, tell us what we do now.
Forgive me. I've been sitting at this desk for, I can't say how long, 3 hours, 4. My wife, Kitty, is in the next room. She's been listening to the broadcasts. She came in once, about an hour ago, and asked whether I intended to say anything publicly. I told her I didn't know. I wasn't sure there was anything left worth saying. I'm still not sure.
Doctor, in 1945, you famously...
Mr. Severade, please. I've spent 17 years being asked to repeat that line. I've nothing to add to it tonight. If you'll permit me a different author, John Donne, any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind. Donne wrote that in 1624, I imagine he didn't have in mind the figures were likely to confirm by morning.
Doctor, what is it you'd have us understand tonight? Tonight?
That this wasn't a surprise. That is what I'd have you understand. The bomb was always going to be used a second time. The only questions were when, and against whom, and at what scale. The men who answered those questions in 1945 chose 2 cities. The men who answered them this afternoon chose, so far as I can determine from your broadcasts, something approaching everything, In 1949, I sat on the General Advisory Committee. Several of my colleagues and I warned, in writing, that the hydrogen weapon then under consideration was a weapon of genocide. I'm being proven correct tonight by the worst possible evidence.
Doctor, who do you hold accountable?
That is the wrong question, Mr. Severade. Forgive me for saying so. Mr. Kennedy didn't build this. Chairman Khrushchev didn't build this. General LeMay didn't build this. These men inherited an architecture of doctrine, an architecture of plans. The single integrated operational plan is a machine. Mutual deterrence is a doctrine. We constructed a system that required perfect human judgment, operating in conditions deliberately engineered to make perfect human judgment impossible. Tonight, the system did exactly what it was designed to do, and exactly what we were warned for 15 years it might one day do.
Doctor, may I ask a personal question?
You may.
Will you sleep tonight?
No. I shouldn't think so. There's a glass of bourbon at my elbow that I haven't yet touched. I expect I shall touch it shortly. My daughter Tony is 17 years old. She's at school in Poughkeepsie, in the state of New York. I've been trying for 3 hours to put a telephone call through to her. I haven't succeeded. I don't know if she's alive. I imagine that by morning this will be the central fact of millions of lives in this country, the not knowing, the waiting for the call that doesn't come. There's very little I can offer those people, Mr. Severade. Only this, they're not alone in the not knowing. They're not...
Dr. Oppenheimer? Doctor, are you still on the line? Ladies and gentlemen, we appear to have lost the connection to Princeton. We'll attempt to reestablish it in the moments ahead. For the present, we return you to our continuing coverage of the events in the Caribbean and along the eastern seaboard. This is Eric Severide, CBS News, New York.
Good evening. This is CBS News. I'm Walter Cronkite. This broadcast originates from a hardened facility outside Washington, the location of which I'm not permitted to disclose. The date is October 28th, 1962. I don't know how many Americans are still able to receive this transmission. I don't know what remains of the cities I've called home. What I can tell you is what has been confirmed by the military authorities present in this facility. At approximately 2:35 this morning, the President of the United States authorized the execution of the Single Integrated Operational Plan, designated SIOP-62. This is the prepared American nuclear war plan. It has been executed in full. Strategic Air Command bombers crossed Soviet airspace beginning at approximately 6:15 a.m., Greenwich Mean Time. Intercontinental ballistic missiles launched from silos across the American Great Plains. Polaris submarines in the Atlantic and Pacific theaters received their authenticated launch orders and executed them. The scope of the attack, as I understand it, included more than 3,000 nuclear warheads delivered against targets in the Soviet Union, the People's Republic of China, and all Warsaw Pact nations. Major Soviet cities, military installations, and command centers have been struck. Joining me now is General Curtis LeMay, Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. General LeMay has been overseeing strike coordination from this facility. General, can you describe for our listeners what has occurred?
Mr. Cronkite, Strategic Air Command has executed the mission it was designed to execute. Our bombers penetrated Soviet airspace. Our missiles reached their targets. The Soviet strategic nuclear capability has been, to the best of our current assessment, substantially degraded. This is what we trained for. This is what deterrence was designed to prevent. It didn't prevent it, and so we've done what was necessary.
General, what is the status of the Soviet retaliatory strike?
The Soviets launched before our first wave reached them. They had approximately 90 minutes of warning. Their ICBM force was smaller than ours, but they fired what they had. Their submarine-launched missiles were already in position. We have confirmed detonations over, or in the vicinity of, the following American cities: Washington, D.C., New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, Norfolk, Miami, Chicago, Detroit, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Omaha, Colorado Springs. Strategic Air Command headquarters at Offutt has been destroyed. The Pentagon is gone. The continuity of government has been transferred to secondary command facilities. There's one further matter I must report. Mr. Cronkite, Mount Weather. The continuity government relocation site in the Blue Ridge was struck by a follow-on Soviet warhead at approximately 7:20 this morning. The President was at Mount Weather. The President is presumed dead.
General, do we have casualty estimates for the homeland?
The planning estimates for a full Soviet retaliatory strike on the American homeland projected between 40 and 60 million dead in the first 24 hours. That number assumes significant warning time and effective civil defense measures. Based on the speed of the exchange, the actual figure may be higher. Our estimates for Soviet losses are correspondingly higher. The population concentrations in the Western Soviet Union have been, for all practical purposes, eliminated. Moscow, Leningrad, Kiev, Minsk. These are no longer functioning cities.
General LeMay, thank you. I understand you have duties to attend to. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't have words adequate to this moment. The nation we knew, the world we knew, has ceased to exist in the form we understood it. The entire eastern seaboard of the United States has been struck by nuclear weapons. The same is true of the Soviet Union. The same will soon be true of Europe. NATO has confirmed the launch of nuclear weapons against Warsaw Pact forces advancing into Western Europe. Soviet tactical nuclear weapons have struck American and Allied positions in Germany. British Bomber Command has confirmed the launch of the V-Bomber Force as part of the coordinated NATO response. The Royal Air Force reports Vulcans of Bomber Command en route to assign targets in the Western Soviet Union. France's Force de Frappe, still nascent, hasn't entered the exchange in any confirmed capacity. The fate of London, Paris, and Rome is unknown at this hour. Closer to home, Canadian cities appear to have been spared direct strikes. Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, all reported intact as of 2 hours ago. The Goose Bay and Argentia naval stations have been hit. Mexico hasn't been targeted. though fallout migration into the northern Mexican states is expected within 48 hours. The line of presidential succession has been disrupted. Vice President Johnson was traveling between Texas and the Pentagon when communications were lost. Speaker McCormick and President pro tempore Hayden are unaccounted for. The Department of State, what remains of it, is functioning under the senior surviving officer at the alternate communications site. If you're receiving this broadcast, you're among the survivors. Remain in shelter, conserve food and water, wait for further instructions from civil defense authorities, don't travel, don't expose yourself to the outside air. We'll continue to broadcast for as long as we're able. May God have mercy on us all. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News.
K7ABC calling any station? Any station on this frequency? Is anyone out there? I've been transmitting for 3 hours. Nothing but static. K7ABC, standing by.
K7ABC, this is W3XYZ. I can hear you. Barely. You're coming through broken.
Well, 3XYZ. Thank God. Where are you? What's your location?
Western Pennsylvania. About 40 miles east of Pittsburgh. I think Pittsburgh is gone.
What do you mean gone?
I mean, I saw it. Last night, there was a light on the horizon, brighter than the sun, brighter than anything I've ever seen. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then a cloud, a column going straight up. I've been trying to reach anyone in Pittsburgh since then. The local AM stations are off the air. The repeater in Johnstown went silent around midnight.
I'm in Montana, about 80 miles north of Great Falls. The Air Force Base, Malmstrom.
Did they hit it?
I don't know. I heard the sirens. That was around 3 in the morning. Then nothing. No radio. No power. I'm running on batteries. There was a glow to the south. Multiple glows, like false suns rising in the wrong direction. I counted 5 of them over maybe 30 minutes.
The silos. The missile silos.
That's what I figured. They were hitting the missile fields. The ground shook for a long time after. I thought the house was going to come down. There's a kind of shimmer on the horizon. Heat waves. But it's October. It shouldn't be that hot.
That's the fires. Everything that was hit is burning. All the buildings. All the people. I can see it from here, to the west. The whole sky has this orange color. It's been that way since last night.
Have you heard from anyone else? Any other stations?
A few. Early this morning, someone in Vermont. Someone who said they were in Tennessee, but I lost them. Nothing from the coast. Nothing from New York. Nothing from Washington.
The major cities. All of them?
I think so. I haven't heard a single station from any major urban area. Just people like us. Rural, small towns. The places they didn't bother to hit.
What do we do now?
I don't know. Stay inside. I guess. Wait for the fallout to settle. Try to reach more people. That's all I can think of.
How long? How long do we stay inside?
I don't know. I don't think anyone knows anymore. The people who were supposed to tell us, they're not.
We 3XYZ. You're breaking up. 3XYZ. Do you copy? K7ABC. Calling any station. Is anyone still out there?
Good evening. This is CBS News. I'm Walter Cronkite, broadcasting from the Emergency Relocation Facility designated Mount Weather. The date is November 5th, 1962. 8 days have passed since the initial exchange. Tonight we address what military planners have termed the secondary effects of nuclear warfare. Specifically, the migration of radioactive fallout across the continental United States and what it means for those who survived the initial detonations. Joining me is Dr. George Kostiakowski, former science advisor to President Eisenhower and one of the principal architects of America's nuclear weapons program. Dr. Kostiakowski has been advising the continuity government on radiation hazards. Doctor, thank you for being with us.
Mr. Cronkite, I wish we were meeting under different circumstances.
Doctor, what can you tell us about the current state of radioactive contamination?
What we are seeing now is exactly what our models predicted, though prediction and experience are very different things. The fallout from the detonations over target areas has been carried by prevailing winds across most of the continental United States. The Midwest, which received relatively few direct strikes, is now experiencing significant contamination from fallout drifting eastward from the Great Plains missile fields. The material itself is visible, fine particulate matter, grayish in color, sometimes with a reddish tint, depending on the soil that was vaporized. People have been calling it the red dust. It settles on every surface. It contaminates water supplies. It adheres to food, to clothing, to exposed skin.
What are the immediate health effects for those exposed?
That depends entirely on the level of exposure. But for those within ground zero, within a radius of approximately 1 to 2 miles of the detonation point, death is instantaneous or nearly so. Thermal radiation, blast overpressure, initial nuclear radiation. There is no meaningful survival in that zone. Beyond that, out to approximately 5 miles, we have severe burn injuries, structural collapse, and acute radiation sickness. Many of those individuals will die within days or weeks. Some are dying now, for fallout exposure specifically. The symptoms progress in stages. Initial nausea and vomiting within the first few hours. A period of apparent recovery. Then the collapse of the immune system, hemorrhaging, hair loss, and organ failure. The timeline depends on the dose.
Doctor, our planning estimates suggested that civil defense measures could protect a significant portion of the population. Were those estimates accurate?
The civil defense plans assumed adequate warning time, functioning shelter systems, and a population that followed instructions precisely. Those assumptions proved optimistic. Many designated shelters were never stocked. Others were in buildings that no longer exist. The majority of the population had less than 30 minutes of warning. I helped develop these weapons. I understood their effects on a theoretical level. What I did not understand, what no one understood, was the scale. The cumulative effect of hundreds of detonations occurring within a span of hours. The numbers we used in planning exercises were abstractions. They are no longer abstract.
Can you give us an estimate of total casualties at this point?
In the United States, approximately 50 to 70 million dead as of today. That number will increase substantially over the coming weeks as acute radiation syndrome claims additional victims. In the Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact nations, our estimates range from 150 to 200 million. In China, which received a significant portion of the SIOP strike, perhaps another 100 million, the combined toll, including Western Europe, may approach 350 million human beings. These are the deaths we can count. The long-term effects of radiation exposure, the disruption of medical systems, the collapse of food distribution. These will claim many more.
Doctor, what advice do you have for those listening who have survived so far?
Stay inside. Do not go outside unless absolutely necessary. If you must go outside, cover all exposed skin, wear a mask or wet cloth over the mouth and nose, and remove all clothing before returning indoors. Do not consume food or water that has been exposed to the outside air. Seal windows and doors as best you can. The fallout will remain dangerous for weeks. The most lethal isotopes decay relatively quickly, but relatively is a word that means something different now than it did 2 weeks ago.
Dr. Kistiakowski, thank you. We have also received word that surviving elements of the federal government have relocated from secondary command facilities to positions we are not permitted to identify. As reported yesterday, President Kennedy was killed when Mount Weather was struck by a Soviet warhead on the morning of October 28th. The line of presidential succession remains unresolved. We have no confirmed word on the status of Vice President Johnson, Speaker McCormick, or President pro tempore Hayden. We will continue to broadcast for as long as we are able. To those of you still listening, you are not alone. We are still here. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News.
My friends, I speak to you tonight from a storm cellar in North Carolina. The walls are concrete, the light is a single kerosene lamp, and outside, the world we knew has passed away. But I am here to tell you that God has not passed away. God has not abandoned His children, and in this hour of darkness, His light shines brighter than ever before. I want to read to you from the book of Isaiah, chapter 43, verses 1 through 3. Listen carefully. For these words were written for this very moment. Fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by thy name, thou art mine. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee. For I am the Lord thy God, the Holy One of Israel, thy Savior. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned. My friends, we have walked through fire. We have seen the fire fall from the sky. We have felt the earth tremble beneath our feet. And yet, we are still here. We are still breathing. We are still listening. That is not an accident. That is the hand of God. Now I know some of you are asking, where was God when the bombs fell? Where was God when the cities burned? Where is God now? As we huddle in basements and cellars and shelters, afraid to breathe the very air, I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear me clearly. God did not do this. Men did this. Men with pride in their hearts and fear in their souls. Men who trusted in missiles instead of mercy. Men who believed that power could save them. But God is here. God is in this cellar with me. God is in your shelter with you. God is in the quiet prayers of mothers holding their children in the dark. God is in the neighbor who shares his last can of food. God is in the voice on the radio that says you are not alone. God is not absent from this moment. God is the only reason this moment is bearable at all. This is our season of testing. Every generation faces a furnace. The Israelites had Egypt. The early church had Rome. Our fathers and mothers had the great wars. And now we, this generation, we have this. We did not choose it. We did not want it.
but it is ours, and we must walk through it with faith. I want to speak now to those who have lost everything, those who have lost husbands and wives, mothers and fathers, children, friends. I cannot tell you that the pain will disappear. It won't. I cannot tell you that it will make sense. It won't. But I can tell you that you are not carrying that grief alone. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. Psalm 34, verse 18. He saves those who are crushed in spirit. Do not let despair take root in your heart. Despair is a choice. Fear is human, but despair is a surrender. And we do not surrender. We do not surrender to the darkness. We do not surrender to the fear. We do not surrender our faith because the world has changed. The world has changed many times. God has not changed once. I want to ask something of you tonight. Share what you have. Speak words of kindness, not words of blame. Pray with those who cannot find words to pray. Be the hands and feet of Christ in this broken world. The institutions have fallen. The governments are scattered. But the church, the true church, is every believer who chooses love over fear. We are the remnant. We are the ones who remain. And our task now is not to rebuild the world that was. Our task is to live as Christ would have us live, even if we are the last people on earth to do so, especially if we are the last people on earth to do so. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we come before you in this hour of trial. We are afraid. We are grieving. We do not understand why this has happened, but we trust in your goodness. We trust in your mercy. We trust that even now, even in this darkness, you are working for our redemption. Give us strength for the days ahead. Give us compassion for one another. Give us faith that does not waver when the ground shakes beneath our feet. And when we emerge from these shelters into whatever world awaits us, let us emerge as your people, carrying your light into the darkness. In the name of Jesus Christ our Lord, amen. God bless you all. God keep you safe. And God bring us through this fire together.
Good evening. This is CBS News. I'm Walter Cronkite. The date is November 20th, 1962. 23 days have passed since the initial exchange. And the world, what remains of it, grows darker by the hour. I speak to you tonight from a facility running on emergency generator power. The fuel reserves are limited. We don't know how much longer we'll be able to maintain this broadcast, but for as long as we can, we'll continue to bring you information. The fires from the initial strikes, the burning cities, the oil refineries and forests that are still ablaze 3 weeks later. They've done something to the sky that the scientists here didn't predict. They're calling it a nuclear winter. Millions of tons of soot and ash have risen into the upper atmosphere, and they're blocking the sun. Joining me now, via a communications link that remains barely functional, is our diplomatic correspondent, Marvin Kalb. Mr. Kalb has been attempting to gather information from what remains of the international monitoring networks. Mr. Kalb, what can you tell us?
Mr. Cronkite, the picture I can assemble is fragmentary, but the fragments tell a consistent story. The fires from the initial attacks, the burning cities, the ignited oil refineries and forests, these fires have injected millions of tons of soot and smoke into the upper atmosphere. That material has spread across the northern hemisphere. It's blocking sunlight. Weather stations that are still reporting, and there are very few, indicate temperature drops of 20 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit below seasonal norms. In some locations, the drop is greater. I've been in contact. Intermittently, with a monitoring station in Norway. They report that at noon yesterday, the sun was visible only as a dim orange disk through the haze. The midday light level was comparable to late twilight. They're recording temperatures of minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit. It's late November, but even for Norway, this is extreme.
Mr. Kalb, what is the status of international communications?
The global telecommunications network has effectively collapsed. The transatlantic cable terminal stations in Britain were destroyed in the initial strikes. Telstar, the communications satellite launched just 3 months ago, was rendered inoperable by high-altitude electromagnetic pulse from the exchange itself. The handful of military satellites still in orbit have gone silent. We're reduced, effectively, to shortwave. There had been talk, in the weeks before the crisis, of establishing a direct communication link between Washington and Moscow, a dedicated line that would allow the two governments to speak in real time during an emergency. It was never built. When events began to spiral, our leaders were communicating through diplomatic cables and radio Moscow broadcasts. The machinery of diplomacy simply couldn't operate at the speed of missiles.
What about Europe? What do we know about the situation there?
We've heard nothing from London, Paris, or Bonn in 11 days. The last confirmed transmission from the British government came from an emergency relocation site in the Scottish Highlands. They reported that central England was blanketed in fallout and that organized government had ceased to function south of Edinburgh. That was November 9th. France and Germany were in the path of the Warsaw Pact ground offensive. The use of tactical nuclear weapons on both sides, combined with the strategic strikes, has effectively eliminated those nations as functioning societies. Switzerland, which attempted to remain neutral, reports severe fallout contamination drifting from the Ruhr Valley. Closer to the United States, Canada has been spared the worst. Goose Bay, Argentia, and the DEW line stations across the Arctic were destroyed in the first wave. Prime Minister Diefenbaker is reported alive at the Diefen bunker outside Ottawa. South of our border, Mexico hasn't been targeted. Radioactive contamination is migrating across the Rio Grande all the same. The Vatican issued its final radio broadcast on November 4th. Pope John XXIII asked the faithful of the world to pray for the souls of the dead and the courage of the living. We've heard nothing from Rome since.
Mr. Kalb, what about Asia? The Far East?
Japan has been struck. Soviet retaliatory missiles targeted American military installations across the home islands. Yokosuka, the headquarters of the United States 7th Fleet, was destroyed in the opening hours. The strike took with it most of Greater Tokyo and Yokohama. Iwakuni and Sasebo, on the southern islands, were similarly hit. The cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, situated within the destruction radius of those bases, didn't survive a second time. Prime Minister Ikeda's government has gone silent. The status of the imperial household is unknown. China, which received a significant portion of the SIOP strike despite not being a direct party to the Cuban confrontation, is silent. The population centers along the eastern seaboard have been eliminated. We've no estimate of Chinese casualties, but given the population density, the number may exceed anything else in this war. And from the southern hemisphere, we hear nothing at all. Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Argentina, Brazil, places that escaped direct strikes by accident of geography, places that should still possess functioning governments and functioning radio. The disrupted ionosphere has cut us off from them as effectively as a continent of static. We don't know if they're receiving us. We don't know what they're saying to one another. Half the human race, such as it remains, is now beyond the horizon of our knowing.
Mr. Kalb, thank you. The picture you describe is, I don't have words for what it is. Here in the continental United States, the electrical grid has failed across most of the country. Power plants that survived the initial strikes have run out of fuel or personnel to operate them. The remaining functional infrastructure is concentrated in isolated pockets, mostly military facilities and hardened government sites. The temperature outside this facility, as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, was 11 degrees Fahrenheit. That is approximately 35 degrees below the seasonal average for this region. The sky has been dark gray for 6 days. We haven't seen direct sunlight in that time. To those still listening, I urge you to conserve whatever heat sources you have. Gather your community. Share resources. The cold that is coming will claim lives as surely as the weapons did. We must survive this together, or we won't survive it at all. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. We'll continue to broadcast for as long as we're able. Stay warm. Stay together. Good night. In the course of the past several hours, our monitoring station has received via shortwave what appears to be a pre-recorded address from the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Mr. Harold Macmillan. The signal is faint. The recording is marked for transmission on the 26th of November, 1962. We've made arrangements to relay it to you now in full as we received it. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
My fellow subjects of the Crown, this is Harold Macmillan. I speak to you tonight, such few of you as may still possess the means to hear me, from a hardened facility of the government's war arrangements, situated somewhere in the west of England. The precise location I'm not at liberty to disclose, though I rather suspect, at this stage, the precaution serves very little purpose. Almost 1 month has now passed since the first of the Soviet warheads struck our islands. In the interval, I've taken such counsel as remained available to me. I've waited, perhaps longer than I ought, for some hopeful dispatch that might soften the account I must now render. No such dispatch has reached me, and so I'll give you the account as it stands. London has been struck. The heart of our ancient city, from Westminster to the Tower, is no longer the principal American air stations in East Anglia. Lakenheath and Mildenhall and Bentwaters received warheads in the opening hour. So too did the early warning station at Fylingdales. So too did the American submarine base at Holy Loch in Scotland. The cities of Birmingham, Manchester and Liverpool have sustained damage I haven't yet the means to survey. Organized government, such as it exists, reaches no farther south than Edinburgh. Our V-bomber force went up, as you would expect of it. The Vulcans and the Victors and the Valiants of Bomber Command carried out the tasks assigned to them under the NATO arrangements. Very few returned. We ought not to have expected that they would. I record here, as a matter of duty, that those crews acquitted themselves in the manner of their fathers at Berlin and Hamburg and 100 other places whose names once meant something. I'll trust you to honor their memory as the years allow. I turn now to the continent. The news is no better there. President de Gaulle of France is unaccounted for, though his government, in some form, continues from a command post in the massive central. Chancellor Adenauer has been confirmed among the fallen at Bonn. The West German Republic, to which we bore such recent hopes, has ceased to function as an organized state. Switzerland alone, as is sometimes her way, endures. On the subject of Her Majesty, I'm able to offer you this much. The Queen has been conveyed to a place of safety under the war arrangements made for the sovereign in just such an event as this one. Her Majesty is in good health. The royal family are together. I won't say more, and I'm sure you'll understand why. It has been among the few mercies of these weeks that the Crown endures. A word, if I may, upon our cousins across the Atlantic. President Kennedy was a dear friend. Over the 3 years of our acquaintance, we corresponded at length. We telephoned at length. We trusted one another as two men in our respective offices seldom have the opportunity to do. He was, you'll permit me to say, the younger brother I was never given by birth. I learnt of his death at Mount Weather on the morning of the 28th. I've not, in the weeks since, found the words to mark his passing in the manner he deserved. I shan't attempt them tonight. Only this, a great and generous man is gone. The Republic he served is the poorer for his going. So am I. From the Commonwealth, what information has reached me is fragmentary. Mr. Diefenbaker of Canada is reported alive and at his post. Mr. Menzies of Australia broadcasts nightly from Canberra, which stands untouched. New Zealand is silent, though I've reason to believe her silence is an accident of the atmosphere rather than of any harm done to her. Mr. Nehru of India, I haven't heard from in a fortnight. The dominions and the dependencies of the Crown are scattered across a hemisphere now largely dark to us. Whether this Commonwealth endures will be the work of hands other than mine. I'm 68 years of age. I was wounded upon the Somme in 1916. I mention it only because it afforded me, when I was younger than most of you listening, an intimate acquaintance with the business of modern war. One learns, at the front, what men are capable of doing to one another when the instruments of doing it are placed in their hands. I'd supposed, foolishly perhaps, that the lessons of that war and of the one that followed had been sufficiently bitter to last us for the age. I was mistaken. Forgive me. We were all of us mistaken. The 46th Psalm, which I commended to my wife Dorothy as a comfort in these last weeks, begins with the words, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore will not we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea. I leave those words with you. Make of them what you can. In the summer of 1914, on the evening of the 3rd of August, Sir Edward Grey stood at a window of the Foreign Office and watched the lamplighters making their rounds below. He remarked to a friend beside him that the lamps were going out all over Europe, and that we shall not see them lit again in our lifetime. Sir Edward was mistaken in one particular. They were lit again. It required 4 years of slaughter, and another generation after that, but they were lit again. My friends, I'm not certain we shall manage the trick a second time. The lamps are out all over Europe tonight. I shouldn't hazard a guess as to when, or by what hands, they may yet be lit again. Carry on, as best you're able. Help one another. Bury your dead with such ceremony as the weather and your strength allow. Teach the young ones, when there are young ones again, what we were. God bless you all. God save the Queen. Good night.
Good evening. This is CBS News. I'm Walter Cronkite. The date is December 10th, 1962, 43 days since the war began. Tonight we address a crisis that is, in its way, as lethal as the weapons that started it. The American food supply is collapsing. Interstate commerce has ceased. And millions of survivors now face an enemy that no bomb shelter can protect them from: hunger. Joining me is Orville Freeman, the Secretary of Agriculture, who has been attempting to coordinate what remains of the federal food distribution apparatus from this facility. Mr. Secretary, thank you for speaking with us.
Mr. Cronkite, I wish I had better news to share.
Mr. Secretary, what is the current state of food production in the United States?
The winter wheat crop has failed completely. The lack of sunlight, combined with the temperature drop and the contamination of soil in many areas, has prevented any meaningful growth. Fields that were planted in October never germinated. Livestock are dying at an alarming rate. Cattle, pigs, poultry, some from radiation exposure, some from contaminated feed and water, some simply from the cold. The animals that survive are too dangerous to consume without testing equipment we no longer have access to.
What about the existing food reserves? The grain silos, the stockpiles?
Much of it was destroyed or contaminated in the initial attacks. The major grain storage facilities in Kansas, Nebraska, and the Dakotas were in the path of fallout from the strikes on our missile fields. Some of that grain might be salvageable. We've no way to test it. We've no way to transport it. The transportation network is gone. The rail lines are severed in dozens of locations. The highways are blocked by abandoned vehicles, by refugees, by debris. The trucking fleet, those trucks are sitting empty because there's no diesel. The refineries in Texas and Louisiana were hit. The ones that survived can't distribute what they produce.
How long can the surviving population sustain itself on existing supplies?
That depends on location. Rural communities with their own food stores, with canned goods, with root cellars, they may last through the winter if they ration carefully. Urban and suburban populations are in immediate danger. The grocery distribution that kept those communities fed no longer exists. We're receiving reports of organized groups seizing food supplies from weaker communities. The breakdown of civil order has accelerated in the past 2 weeks. The National Guard units that were supposed to maintain peace, many of them have dissolved. The soldiers went home to protect their own families. From Nebraska, we received word 10 days ago of a refugee camp west of Lincoln. National Guard authorities, 4,000 survivors, 1,100 dead from radiation sickness in the first 3 weeks. The medical officer worked until she collapsed. No federal supplies arrived. We don't know if any of those 4,000 are still living tonight.
Mr. Secretary, is the federal government still functioning in any meaningful capacity?
In pockets. The continuity government is operational, but our ability to project authority beyond these hardened facilities is limited. We can broadcast, we can issue directives, we can't enforce them, we can't deliver supplies, we can't rebuild what has been destroyed. I've been in government my entire adult life, governor of Minnesota, cabinet secretary. I've always believed in the capacity of institutions to solve problems, but institutions require people. They require infrastructure. They require time. We don't have any of those things anymore.
Before we hear the Secretary's closing advice, I would ask our listeners to permit a brief word. The funeral arrangements for President Kennedy and for those of his family confirmed lost at Mount Weather can't be conducted in the manner the office demanded. There is no honor guard. There is no Capitol rotunda. The continuity government, what remains of it, observed 3 minutes of silence on the morning of November the 8th. That is all the remembrance the Republic could afford its 35th president. We pause now, in our own way, to mark it again. Mr. Secretary, what advice can you offer to those listening?
Ration what you have. 1 meal a day if necessary. Conserve every calorie. Work with your neighbors. Pool resources. Share equally. Communities that cooperate will survive. Communities that turn on each other won't. If you have seeds, keep them dry and protected. When the skies clear, and they'll clear eventually, you'll need to plant. And that may be months from now. But that day will come, and the people who have seeds will be the ones who rebuild.
Secretary Freeman, thank you. To our listeners, we understand that these words offer little comfort. The situation is dire. We won't pretend otherwise. But we've survived 43 days, and every day of survival is a day closer to whatever comes next. Hold on, help each other, and don't give up. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. We remain on the air. Good night. Good evening. This is CBS News. I'm Walter Cronkite. The date is December 25th, 1962, Christmas Day. I do not know how many of you are still receiving this broadcast. Our power reserves are critically low. The fuel for the generators is nearly exhausted. This may be among our final transmissions. And so, on this most sacred of evenings, we speak not of what has been lost, but of what we carry forward. Joining me tonight is Robert Trout, my colleague and friend, a man who has been part of CBS News since its earliest days. We sit together in this bunker with a single lantern between us, and we remember.
Thank you, Walter. It's strange, isn't it? A year ago tonight, I was in New York. There was a tree at Rockefeller Center, carolers on Fifth Avenue, snow on the windowsills. I remember thinking it was the most perfect Christmas I'd ever seen.
1961, it seems like another lifetime.
It was another lifetime. We complained about traffic, about taxes, about the Russians and the bomb and the Cold War. We worried about missiles in Turkey and Cuba. We worried about Berlin, but we never really believed, not in our bones, that it would actually happen. I was in London for the invasion. I broadcast while the boys crossed the channel on D-Day. I thought I understood what war was. I didn't understand anything. What happened in October, no one could have prepared for that.
We have received no confirmed signals from Europe in 21 days. The monitoring stations that were still operational, the naval bases in Iceland and the Azores, they went silent 2 weeks ago. We do not know if anyone has left to transmit.
London, Paris, Rome, the great capitals of Western civilization, cities that survived the Huns and the plague and the first two wars. Are they still there? Are the buildings still standing? Is anyone walking those streets?
Asia is equally silent. No signals from Japan, nothing from Australia. The southern hemisphere, which escaped the direct strikes, should still be functional, but we cannot reach them. The ionosphere has been disrupted. The communication satellites are debris.
You think anyone is listening tonight? Somewhere out there, huddled around a radio, waiting for a voice to come through the static.
I have to believe they are. I have to believe that somewhere a family is gathered together, sharing what little they have, keeping each other warm, and listening for a sign that they're not alone. That's why we keep broadcasting. That's why we don't stop.
I think about the fog of war, that phrase. Clausewitz wrote about it. The confusion and uncertainty of battle. But this wasn't a battle. This was, I don't know what to call it, a spasm, a reflex. Decisions made in minutes that ended everything built over centuries. I keep asking myself, was there a moment when it could have been stopped? A word that could have been spoken? A message that could have been delivered in time? Or was this always where we were headed, from the moment we split the atom?
I don't know. I've turned that question over in my mind 1,000 times. There were moments, decisions that could have gone differently, a submarine commander who could have refused to fire, an airstrike that could have been delayed another hour, a message that arrived too late. But here we are, and asking what could have been won't feed the hungry or warm the cold. We have to think about what comes next. Not what we lost, what we build from what remains.
Merry Christmas, Walter. If those words can mean anything tonight.
Merry Christmas, Robert. And to all of you listening, wherever you are, whatever you're facing tonight, you are not forgotten. We are still here. We are still reaching out across the darkness. This is CBS News. I'm Walter Cronkite. May God bless you and keep you. Good night.
This is an official emergency advisory from the Office of Civil Defense. This message is intended for all citizens in designated survival zones. This advisory supersedes all previous instructions.
The Office of Civil Defense acknowledges that medical personnel and pharmaceutical supplies are no longer available in most regions of the continental United States. The following guidance is provided for communities managing health emergencies without professional medical assistance.
For individuals exhibiting symptoms of acute radiation syndrome in advanced stages, including persistent hemorrhaging, severe infection, and organ dysfunction, palliative measures are advised. Palliative care focuses on comfort rather than recovery. Keep the affected individual warm and dry. Provide small amounts of water if the individual can swallow. Do not force food or liquid if the individual cannot swallow safely. Maintain cleanliness to the extent possible. Remain present with the affected individual. Isolation is not recommended in terminal cases. If sedative or analgesic medications are available, they may be administered according to standard dosing guidelines. If such medications are not available, verbal reassurance and physical presence provide measurable comfort to individuals in distress. Following the death of an individual, the remains should be removed from the shelter environment as soon as practical. If burial is not possible due to frozen ground conditions, remains should be placed in an exterior location away from water sources and food storage areas. Mark the location for future identification. The Office of Civil Defense will continue to broadcast on this frequency for as long as equipment remains operational. Broadcast intervals may become irregular as fuel and personnel resources diminish. Citizens are advised to monitor this frequency at regular intervals. No timeline for the restoration of normal government services can be provided at this time. No timeline for the restoration of electrical grid services can be provided at this time. No timeline for the restoration of food distribution networks can be provided at this time. Citizens are advised to rely on local community resources and to cooperate with neighboring survival groups. The federal government cannot guarantee assistance to individual citizens or communities at this time. Repeat. Palliative care is advised for individuals in advanced stages of radiation syndrome. Keep the affected individual warm, provide water if possible, and remain present. The Office of Civil Defense will continue to broadcast for as long as possible. This has been an official emergency advisory from the Office of Civil Defense. May God be with the people of the United States.
Good evening. This is CBS News. I'm Walter Cronkite. The date is January 1st, 1963, a new year, though what that means now, I cannot say. I am alone in this broadcast facility. The technical staff departed 3 days ago, hoping to reach their families in what remains of the southern states. I don't know if they made it. I don't know if their families are still alive to reach, but they had to try. I understood that. I want to use what time remains to speak plainly. As I have tried to speak throughout my career, without varnish, without evasion, just the truth as best I understand it. 65 days ago, the world we knew came to an end. It ended not in one catastrophic moment, but in a cascade of moments. A submarine commander who fired when he should have waited, a surface-to-air battery that engaged without authorization, an invasion plan that met weapons no one expected, and then the missiles, rising from their silos on both sides of the world, crossing each other in the upper atmosphere, and falling. I have tried throughout these broadcasts to give you information, casualty estimates, fallout projections, survival guidance. I have tried to be the steady voice you needed when the world was shaking. But tonight, in this final hour, I want to set aside the facts and figures. I want to speak to you as one human being to another. I covered the Nuremberg trials. I glided into Holland with the 101st Airborne at Market Garden. I reported from the rubble of cities that had been bombed into silence. I thought I understood what war was. I was a fool. What happened in October was not war in any sense that word has ever meant. It was annihilation. It was the weaponization of the sun itself, brought down upon cities full of sleeping children. It was the work of a single afternoon, undoing everything humanity had built over millennia. And yet, we are still here. Some of us, scattered, frightened, hungry, but alive. And if we are alive, then there is still something to be done with our lives, still some purpose to be found, still some kindness to be shown. I think about the decisions that led us here, the miscalculations, the misreadings of intention, the fog of war that descended over rational men and turned them into automatons executing plans they had never truly believed would be used. Somewhere in that fog, there was a moment when it could have been stopped, a word that could have been spoken, a hand that could have hesitated on the launch key, but the system was designed to function without hesitation. That was the point of it. Deterrence required the certainty of retaliation. And so the system did what it was built to do. It retaliated, it destroyed, it functioned perfectly. And in functioning perfectly, it ended everything. If there is a lesson in this, and I believe there must be a lesson, it is that no system is wiser than the people who operate it. No weapon is safer than the judgment of the hand that holds it. We built machines of absolute destruction and trusted that human wisdom would never allow them to be used. We were wrong. I don't know who will hear these words. Perhaps no one. Perhaps the signal will carry only into static. But if someone is listening, if you are out there in the darkness with a radio pressed to your ear, I want you to know this. You matter. Your survival matters. The choices you make in the days ahead, the kindness you show to strangers, the hand you extend to someone in need, those things matter. The civilization that was destroyed can be rebuilt. Not tomorrow, not next year, but someday, and it will be rebuilt by people like you. I want to thank you, all of you. For 25 years, you invited me into your homes. You trusted me to tell you the truth about the world. I tried to honor that trust. I hope I did. My wife Betsy is in New York. I don't know her fate. I haven't known for 65 days. Nancy, Kathy, Chip, I tell myself they made it somewhere safe. I tell myself I'll see them again. Maybe I'm lying to myself, but some lies are necessary to keep breathing. To whoever is listening, wherever you are, hold on to each other. Be good to each other. Remember what we were and build something better than what we became. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. And that's the way it is, January 1st, 1963. Good night.